This week on CyberSchool, we're going to be doing a quick demonstration of the SIP paging server and SIP speaker, kind of doing a demo of the different web pages and specific features of both products and how they can integrate together. We get a lot of questions about setting up the paging server and the speakers together, so we decided that we would do a quick demonstration of those two products, important settings, and how to integrate the two. So what are we going to be covering today? We're of course going to be covering the SIP paging server and then important and useful settings on that particular product. So we'll thumb through a couple different web pages explaining the different web pages and the settings, where they'll be found and how they interact with a particular device. We'll set up a scheduled event and a paging group, so that way you understand how the different paging groups or zones work and how they interact with the different scheduled events. And that covers the actual output of the multicast and those different events as they go across the network. And then we'll cover the SIP talkback speaker. And specifically, of course, we'll go over again the important pages and useful settings on that particular product and explain the audio health check as well as the different various audio modes the speaker can be used in, as well as the multicast priority setup. So that way you can set up the different scheduled events and paging groups to be received on the speaker. And that way that'll really demonstrate the integration of both the paging server and the talkback speaker together. Okay, so now that we've covered what we're actually going to be covering in the video, let's go ahead and pull up the different web pages for the particular CyberData products we'll be taking a look at today. There's two ways, actually three ways to find CyberData products on your network. Number one, of course, being looking at your DHCP server and coordinating the MAC address to the specific IP addresses that were granted to the device. That's kind of a good way to be able to view all of the different products if you've got access to your DHCP network, but that's not always the case. Option number two would be to use the RTFM button, reset to factory mode button, on any CyberData product. And when that button is depressed for a brief period of time, about 1 to 2 seconds, not held, pressed, key distinction there, the device will actually announce its IP address, meaning it will say your IP address is 192.168, etc., and actually announce its IP address. And that's really easy if you're setting up one or two devices, say in a lab environment, or you're trying to work on a single device. But if you're setting up, say, 50 to 60 devices, it's not really easy to go around to, say, each individual classroom and press that individual button and write down their IP addresses. That's not the right way to go about it. And we would recommend using what we call our CyberData Discovery utility. And this is a utility that we distribute for free. It's available for download on our website. And the nice thing with this tool is it'll scan your local area network and report back any CyberData devices that have been found on the network and give you a nice little utility to both view all of the heads-up information about those particular devices. So as you can see here in our different columns, we get the IP address, the DHCP status, whether it's DHCP or statically assigned, the device's MAC address, serial number, and then finally the device names. The two devices we'll be looking at today, as I mentioned, are the SIP paging server and the CyberData SIP speaker. So first we'll pop up our paging server. And when you click that open browser button, it's just going to go ahead and open the web page for the CyberData device in your preferred browser. And we'll log in. The default login information for any CyberData device is going to be admin, admin, both lowercase. And after signing in, the web page will briefly load here for a moment, and you'll be greeted with our Home tab. Our Home tab gives you a great heads-up display of all the relevant information for the SIP paging server, or any product for that matter, to give you very brief explanation and information about the equipment that you're looking at. So on our left-hand column here, where you're going to find the most information, is going to be information, say, for example, like the serial number, MAC address, firmware version, etc. That kind of good information that's used for record keeping or just making sure you're working on the particular device you think you're working on. Next, in our second grouping here, we've got all of your network related information. So all of the specifics, say IP address, subnet mask, gateway, and DNS servers that the device is using. And then finally, down in the bottom of our left-hand column, you've got the registration status of the primary, backup servers, and the night ringer server. Don't be alarmed if you're only ever using the primary SIP server. The backup servers are very distinctly used on specific platforms, Cisco Unified Call Manager being the one primary one. that actually uses the primary and backup servers. Most modern servers, not to say that Cisco is not modern, but most modern hosted providers, say like RingCentral or Zoom, use DNS-based redundancy. So that way you don't need to bother with setting up a primary, backup, and secondary server. You only set up the primary, and everything just kind of magically works through DNS rules. So you'll be able to see all of the heads-up information about the device status, its IP address, and the registration status right here on the Home tab. On our right-hand side, you can also import and export configuration files for the device. So if it's already set up and say you're after, say, restoring defaults, you're just reconfiguring the device, or you want to back up your settings just in case you have to restore defaults in the future, you can find these two buttons here on the Home tab. Finally, you can also adjust the username and the login password for the device. We definitely recommend doing that because all of our devices ship with admin, so you'll definitely want to go and reconfigure those just to make sure that you're protecting every part of your equipment. So for the first page that we'll go through past the Home tab is we'll thumb over to our Device tab here. And on our Device tab, this is where we've got any particular settings that are going to interact with the actual hardware of the device itself. So we'll go through these different sections and explain what they do. Starting in our top left-hand section here, we've got our line in settings. And all of these different settings here for the line in handle what the paging server will do with that line in connection. It uses a mono RCA unbalanced 10,000 ohm input. And that can be used for, say, background music for a factory, a warehouse, a department store, what have you. We've also had some schools integrate a radio system with it. It can be used basically if you've got an audio signal and you want to get that input to the paging server and then output from the paging server, this is where you'll specifically handle that. You've got options for what we call line in to line out loopback. And what that does is that takes any line in audio and just immediately forces that out the physical outputs of the unit, either that RCA output or the tip and ring style output, both simultaneously. So that way, if you've got, background music and you're trying to pipe that in for your factory or your department store, you can do that with this checkbox here. You can also send that same audio back across the network as multicast, and you can do both of these simultaneously. So if you've got background music that you want to be playing in your factory, but you've also got, say, some speakers in your shipping area, say some CyberData IP66 outdoor horns, you can send that out to the horns via multicast. And with a priority-based engine that we'll cover later today, you can actually have that be superseded by either a SIP call or another page or announcement. So that way your background music, your general radio won't actually play over some kind of an emergency announcement. As we move to our right-hand side here, we've got our relay settings, and this activates the onboard relay of the paging server when any local audio is being either passed through or generated from the paging server. And this is useful when you're connecting to amplifiers that have different inputs. Sometimes audio inputs are routed through the amplifier, and we're just one of the many different audio inputs to an amplifier. An example might be, say, a dedicated microphone that's plugged into it in addition to one of our devices. So that way the onboard relay of the paging server can trigger when any announcement is made, and that basically tells the amplifier that a higher priority audio is coming through and to play that particular audio. So that's very, very often used with different physical connections to amplifiers. In our bottom left-hand corner, we've got our clock settings, and these are going to be the NTP settings for the actual paging server. It doesn't have a physical clock on it, but time settings are very, very important when you're going to be setting up different scheduled events. So that way the paging server knows what time it is, and that way the events can all go off at the correct time. The time setting is all very easily set with just the continent that the equipment is going to be in, or the country, and then the particular city that it's located in. And you can easily find these different time zones either by contacting our support department or doing a quick Google search to determine the particular time zone string that you'll want to have that input there. And you can always tell the current time on the device. So as you're adjusting that time zone, you can see it all printed here. Of course, when the web page is loaded, it's not dynamically loaded there. Finally, on our right-hand side, we've got our miscellaneous settings. We've got our device name, which is the field that would actually appear on the device name column of the discovery utility. So that way you can actually go and identify, say, a particular device. Not as necessary when you're dealing with a product like our paging server, because you'll probably only have one of those on your network, but more important, say, when you're dealing with the SIP speaker that will be showing off momentarily, when you want to identify those, say, per an individual classroom or a location in your facility. As we go through these other settings in here, you've got different beep options to enable, say, a beep on init or initialization when the device boots up. So that way, you know, as soon as the device comes online, or if for some reason the device is rebooting itself often, you'll hear a beep, say, every 45 seconds to a minute, you know, something's probably going on. Most customers don't use that, but they will use the beep before page. And what that does is that generates a beep tone at the start of every announcement, actually from the paging server. So that way it doesn't have to be done on the remote side on the devices receiving the announcement. And that's really useful for analog connections to, say, an analog amplifier. So that way you get that beep tone, kind of that pre-page tone. So that way any people that are supposed to be hearing that announcement hear the tone and they know, hey, I should pay attention. There's some kind of an announcement coming through. Finally, we've got different options for Polycom multicast paging. Our devices support poly paging, and you can select the particular checkbox there and then enable the Polycom transmit channel that you're going to be using. The last setting that we'll talk about in this miscellaneous settings before we move on to our test function buttons is just the bypass DTMF menus. This product is designed to utilize the 100 different page groups, but in some instances and on some platforms, bypass DTMF menus is absolutely essential to set up, because that will bypass those menus, and you'll hear that a little bit later when we actually get to a live demonstration where there will actually be basically an auto attendant that will prompt you to enter a 2-digit zone number. You can't have that on particular platforms. One key example is going to be Ring Central. If the device is set up as a paging device, you can't utilize the different menus as a paging device because of the distinct restrictions of a paging device on Ring Central. So that setting is essential in some platforms, and some users don't actually need all of the 100 different paging groups that the device supports, and you can easily bypass that if you don't have a requirement for these different multicast group paging. So finally, to talk about the different test settings that we have here, we've got a test audio button. And what the test audio button does is that will play a audio message through the physical outputs of the paging server. And it'll say, this is your CyberData IP speaker test message. And that's useful for just connecting your testing your analog connection, just to make sure that you can actually pass audio through the paging server. So if you're trying to do any troubleshooting where you've got the paging server hooked up and you're not getting audio through your phone system, you first want to make sure that you can get audio just from the paging server through the analog amplifier. Instead of adding in the phone system into the mix, when you hit the test audio button, that just plays a locally generated audio file directly from the paging server and outputs that. It eliminates a whole bunch of variables and lets you understand, okay, is it an analog problem or is it a network problem? As we move on, we've got the test relay functionality, which is just useful if you're going to be using that onboard relay. And then finally, the test multicast button, which operates just like the test audio button, but instead of playing that message over the analog outputs, it actually sends it across the network at a specific address and port combination to be able to test the multicast throughput of the paging server and the different network switches and any other relevant hops that multicast traffic is going to be passing through. We'll skip over our network tab as we jump over to our different tabs here. A network tab is a network tab. That's where you set up all of your network information. The next page that we jump over to is our SIP tab. Here on our SIP tab is where you'll do all of the different configuration for the actual SIP server. This is kind of, you know, a one-time touch in terms of setup on the paging server. Once you set up all this information, you won't really need to do it again. As you'll notice, we've got two different sections on here, both what we call our primary section, where you'll set up the extension used for voice paging. In this example, extension 100 on my phone system will allow me to call the paging server, utilize the 100 different paging groups, and make some kind of a voice announcement or a stored message announcement. So that way you can go and actually use that for voice paging. The night ringer section over here on our right-hand side is used for loud ringing, night ringer, an additional ringing notification. There's a whole bunch of different names and nomenclatures used for this particular feature set. We call it night ringer. And what this is used for is this is added into a ring group or a call queue, and it provides additional ringing notification, additional auditory notification of an incoming call. So it's extremely useful for, say, a group sales line, support line, or say in use with a ring group from one of CyberData's intercoms, so that way you know somebody's at your front door. It just provides that additional auditory notification. And of course, it can come through the physical outputs or via multicast to all the different CyberData equipment on your network. So whether you're using the paging server as an IP to analog device or as an IP to multicast device, you can be able to get the night ringer to any of those equipment. There are additional settings in here, as I mentioned, the backup server settings, which aren't only necessary for specific platforms, as well as a way to set up all of the different SIP transport protocols, UDP, TCP, or TLS, as well as the different TLS versions, outbound proxy settings, and then RTP settings if you need to adjust, say, the RTP port, encryption, or the jitter buffer. These are more advanced settings, and for today's setup, we're really only going to be using the very basic, just primary SIP registration. So once you set up anything on a SIP tab, if you've ever set up a SIP phone or any other kind of VoIP equipment, this will all look very familiar, maybe presented in a different manner to, say, another product out there, but once you've set up some kind of a SIP product, you've got an understanding of what kind of settings will be used on here. Next, we'll move over to our PGroups tab, and these are your paging groups. These are the different groups or zones that can be utilized from the paging server. There are 100 different groups. As you'll see here on our first page, we've got groups 0 through 9, and these are all going to be used in a 2-digit number. So you've got 00, 01, so on and so forth, all the way through to page number 10, where we've got 90 through 99, which makes 100 different groups. Now, all of these groups, again, are all going to be multicast-based zones. They're basically zones in the IP world. Instead of having different physical zones, actual different physical wire going to specific speakers to create a physical zone, this is all done via networking utilizing multicast. And we'll go through and we'll configure one of these different paging groups, which will be essential as we get to our schedules tab a little bit later. So to set up one of these, you just click the edit button here out of the chart, and it brings you a nice little pop-up. And in this pop-up, you can go and configure the address and port combination, and this is the one where the multicast will actually be output to. There's a specific range of IP addresses used for multicast. If you're not familiar with those, you can stick with our defaults, or if there are particular multicast address and port combinations that you would like to use, go ahead and adjust those if you want, but for the purposes of today's video, we'll just be using our default multicast address and port combination as we said here. One of the things we always recommend doing is renaming your particular group, so that way when you're adjusting this in the future, say 6 months from now, you understand what paging group 00 means, because that might not mean anything to you in 6 months. And we'll set that as our all page group here, which would hit all of the different equipment that we're going to be paging to. And if you like, depending on the use case, you can set a security code. In some environments, especially school environments, we recommend setting a security code for any kind of paging capability that might be done, because kids will be kids, teenagers will be teenagers, and if they get the option to make an announcement through the entire school system, you'd like to prevent that, just to prevent any kind of shenanigans that might go on. And you can set a security code here. Security codes are any character that can be entered on a standard phone keypad, so 0 through 9, and then as well as star and pound or hash, depending on how old you are. And that can all be set here. Next, you've got your time to live setting. You basically won't change that. And then finally, down here at the bottom, you've got either the line out option. So by default, all of these different paging groups will just send audio through the actual physical outputs of the paging server. If you're not utilizing the paging outputs, you can, of course, disable it, but it's not going to hurt anything if you leave it enabled, which is why we have this as a default for any of our paging groups. Now, if you'd like to use one of these different paging groups as a stored message group, meaning instead of it being a live page announcement, so when you call that particular particular page group and talk through it, everything you say is going to immediately come out of the speakers. You can instead set it up as a stored message group. And what a stored message group does is it gives you the capability to call the paging server and enter some particular DTMF code. In an example that we'll set up after this, we'll set that for group number 10. That'll give you the capability to call the paging server, dial group number 10, and it will play that stored message audio file. The number of times to play is you can set here, which makes it really, really powerful for things like, say, huddles in a department store. You're trying to get all your salespeople together, talking about your sales goals for the day, or in a school environment, if you've got something like an earthquake drill that you do a couple times a year, but not, say, on a specific date at a specific time. You don't want to set up a scheduled event for that. You want to just be able to call the paging server and trigger that announcement. You can do that with a stored message group. And once you're done configuring the group, simply just click the OK button here to commit those changes, and then you'll just want to save the changes as we're done here. And you'll want to do that anytime that you make any changes on any CyberData product, just to make sure that all of the changes that you've made get actually saved to the device. So the second step that we'll do here is just over on page number 2 here, is we'll set up that stored message group, and we'll just call this stored message. You know what? Let's call it earthquake drill. Earthquake drill. And we'll, of course, have this go to this address and port combination. We don't need to adjust that because we'll just set up all of our speakers to listen for this particular group. We're not, you know what, we will set a security code just to make sure that this is protected in there. We'll set that to 123 for demonstration purposes. And we'll just click our stored message option here. And that gives you the capability to select an audio file and pick the number of times to play. We'll just pick a school bell audio file here. It's just what I have preloaded, but you can upload any particular audio file. And in a moment, we'll cover where you can actually upload these different files. And then depending on the length of the file, you can either input in an audio file that is long and have that only play once, or an audio file that is short and have that play multiple times. So just for our configuration here, we'll go through and we'll have it play 10 times, again, just as an example. And now that we've configured this group, we'll just hit OK and save. And as you'll notice here in our group, as the page reloads, we've got our group number 0 here. This is our all page group that we configured in our first step. And then here on page 2, we've got our earthquake grill. And you'll notice in our page column here, we've got a bunch of asterisks that mark that there is a security code set. So that's how we set up these different paging groups, which will be utilized by our schedules. And we'll cover that in a moment. Next, we'll cover our audio files tab. Audio files are going to be super important for setting up both schedules and, as you saw, with stored messages, because you need to upload audio files to be able to either create a scheduled event or create a stored message group. Because if there are no audio files in there, you can't tell it what audio file to play because there aren't any. So as we go through this page, you can see that we've got a whole bunch of different audio files actually loaded into the paging server. And since we sell these products internationally, we give the capability to adjust any of the audio files in the actual equipment to localize it to the particular language that's used on that equipment. We sell our equipment all over the place, so we've got a lot of different schools that'll go and say change these to Spanish, to French, what have you, depending on whatever language is spoken in this particular country. You can go and relocalize any of these different audio files that are generated from the device to that particular language locale. They're, of course, going to ship in English because all of our products are manufactured in Monterey, California. But if you're using them in an area where English is not the native language, you can adjust these different audio settings. So down here at the bottom is where we've got our stored message section and our bells section. And this is where you upload the audio files for either of those setups. Whether you're going to be using stored messages, you can go and select your different stored message using the Choose File button here, and it brings up your usual file explorer that you would know, and you pick the particular audio file that you want to use, and you click that upload message. And the same thing goes for bells. We do require a particular format for audio files for CyberData devices, and we've got a video that explains how to go and configure those. So I'll have that linked in the description below. So finally, we'll jump over to our schedules tab, the last thing that we'll set up on our paging server here. So in our scheduled events section here, you can see that we've got a big chart that explains both the event name, the days of the week the scheduled event will play, the particular time that they'll play at, the audio file associated with this event, and then what page group or what zone this announcement is going to be played to. So setting up, of course, your P groups, your paging groups, and your audio files are absolutely essential before you set up any of your scheduled events. So when you want to set up a scheduled event, simply just click the New button here, and it'll give you a nice little pop-up that allows you to configure the scheduled event. You've got different days of the week that you can select with just a little checkbox. So we'll just do it as we're setting up a school here, Monday through Friday, and we'll set a name for the bell. And we'll say this is our 8:30 bell, 8:30 a.m. bell. And you always want to be as verbose as possible when you're setting up one of these different scheduled event names. So that way in the future, when you're adjusting this or somebody else takes over actually setting up the paging server, they'll understand what all of these bells are done or actually do. Next, we'll set our time. And for the time that you'll want to set here, it's all going to be measured in 24-hour time or military time, so that way you don't have to deal with, oh, is noon AM or PM or any of that kind of funny stuff. You just set it in 24-hour time to take all of the guesswork out of that. So then since this is our 8:30 AM bell, we're just going to set our time here to 08:30. Next, we'll pick our audio file, and we've just got the single audio file loaded in here, school-bell-synth.wave. And now that we've picked that, we'll just pick our group, and we want this to go to page group 0, so that way it hits all of the different, it hits the entire school. And if you like, you can adjust the number of times to play. So for example, if you've got an audio file and you want to use that for a bell and it only plays a single time, you can have that play multiple times to create multiple tones in a bell. Or if you've got an audio file like the school bell synth that we have here that is a series of tones in a single audio file, you could just have it play once. So you can really customize the style of your audio files by using the number of times to play. Then finally, we've got the relay activation setting here. Most of the time, most users aren't going to be utilizing the actual relay functionality on here. We added this for a very specific use case where a school had our paging server connected to their door control system. And what that allowed them to do is at certain times of the week, they could actually go and lock the entire school at a particular period. It was used in a middle school and a high school, so that way they could easily do tardy sweeps. So say, for example, going into third period, they would have the doors lock indefinitely by using the activate indefinitely function. So right as soon as third period starts, the onboard relay of the paging server would trigger, which was connected to their door lock system. That activation trigger, that relay closing, completes a circuit and would tell their door lock system, hey, lock all of the doors immediately as this bell goes off. And the doors would stay locked for the duration of that particular period, which would give a lot of, it'd be very helpful for the teachers, so that way they don't have to remember and they don't all have to look at the memo that, oh, it is third period, I need to lock my door at the start of the period. Everything just happens automatically. And then at the end of third period, they use the deactivate indefinitely feature, which then opened that relay, told the door control system that the circuit is no longer closed and it should unlock all of the doors, which gave them that automatic capability to lock and unlock the doors for a particular period, which made doing tardy sweeps really, really easy for that particular school. But you can also activate it just for the duration of the bell. So if you've got, say, like what I commonly refer to as a whirly-bird set of strobes, and you want those strobes to start spinning around when a particular bell goes off, you can do that. Most of the time, this is not actually used, but if you've got that kind of setup there, you can actually use this functionality for depending on your use case. And then finally, now that we're done setting up this event, we just click our Save button here. The page will take a moment to commit that change, and we'll see that now we've got the 8 a.m. and the 8:30 bell that we just configured for our paging server. Now that we've gone through and we've covered the paging server, let's jump over to the SIP speaker. Okay, so now that we've finished setting up our SIP paging server, let's jump over to the SIP speaker and go over some key settings on the SIP speaker, as well as set it up to receive these different multicast pages and scheduled events. So, as you'll notice here on our Home tab, it's got the same look and feel as the Home tab of the paging server. And we do this by design. If you've set up one CyberData device, you'll know the web interface of any CyberData device, which makes it really easy to set up and configure equipment in the CyberData ecosystem. On our left-hand side, you'll see that we've got the same feature set and same capabilities. You've got your serial number, MAC address, IP information, and registration status of the device, and your import and export configuration settings on the right-hand side of the page. So all of the pages, as you'll notice, as you configure more and more CyberData devices, are going to be very uniform, and it makes it very, very easy to set up one device and then many devices. So if you've set up one, you can set up any. So let's jump through and let's jump over to our device tab. And just like on the paging server, this is where you'll set up any particular settings that'll interact with the actual device itself. So starting on our left-hand side, we've got our DTMF settings, and these are settings that you can use when you're actually using the accessory talkback button, which makes it very advantageous to use this particular speaker because with a talkback button, you can actually trigger a call from the speaker. Instead of only being able to call to the speaker, you can make a call from the speaker, which makes it really great in classrooms if, say, for example, you might have a teacher that has some medical issues or perhaps has epilepsy. And instead of having to expect the students in the classroom to understand how to work the regular desk phone, God forbid the teacher has some kind of an issue, a student can run up and just press that call button, and it can be preset and call the I can call the front office, and that way the students can say, "Hey, Mrs. Jones just had a seizure. Please send somebody down here for some kind of an event." So it makes the SIP speakers very, very capable and very, very powerful. But the DTMF settings can also allow the speaker to be used in a push-to-talk mode that we'll talk about a little bit more briefly. On our right-hand side here, we've got our different power settings. These speakers are designed to be utilized with 802.3 AT Alpha Tango power, and that gives them a full 30 watts of PoE power to work with, which just gives them more oomph. As you'll see here on my speaker, I'm just using it off a standard AF Alpha Frank switch, which gives it 15.4 watts of power to work with. So even though the speaker is designed for use on AT power, full 30 watts. It will work on lower power, but with lower power just means that it can't run as many accessories, and it also just can't create as more sound. More power equals more sound. So by actually negotiating and setting up all of these devices as full PoE 802.3 AT power, that full 30 watts, it gives them a lot more power and capability to make announcements and run additional settings. And the nice thing is it'll tell you right here on the web page if it's actually properly negotiated that full 30 watts of power, which is really helpful for troubleshooting maybe volume issues in a particular classroom. As we move back to our left-hand side here, we've got our time settings. Of course, this device does support working with an NTP server to get the local area time, and this is just about as important as working with the paging server's clock settings because the SIP speaker supports an auxiliary clock kit. So that way you can have a digital clock to be able to get notifications and tell time. So of course, if there's a clock, it's really important for the speaker to know what time it is. So you can go and adjust the various time settings here. For our setup today, we're not going to be using our clock kit. As you can see down here, clock kit is not installed. So the time settings are not super important for this particular speaker, but if you're going to be using our accessory clock kit, actually having the time settings configured is absolutely crucial, so that way the speaker can show the correct time. The unit also has an onboard relay, and you can activate that relay with DTMF from a calling party. So if somebody calls the speaker, you can enter in a DTMF pattern to actually pulse or toggle, meaning enable or disable the relay to take different actions. And that can be activating a dedicated strobe, activating a fire panel or a door lock system, what have you. It's an onboard relay, and you can do a whole bunch of different options with that. As we move down here to our relay or miscellaneous settings section, you can go and you can reconfigure the device name. And again, the device name is what will show up in the device name column on the CyberData Discover utility, which makes it really powerful and really easy to identify a particular classroom speaker. Instead of trying to say key it off the serial number or the MAC address, you can name it to classroom 101 speaker. That way you can actually know just at a heads up glance as you're going through that list of products on your network that you know exactly what speaker you want to work with. It makes work in the future much, much easier. And we've got similar settings like we had on the paging server, both beep on init, beep on initialization, beep when the speaker boots up, as well as beep on page, which just would be a locally generated beep tone from the speaker itself rather than having that inline audio from the paging server. There's no real benefit to, say, doing it from the paging server or on the speaker, so that's at the user's discretion. You can also enable the dual speaker setting. So one of the nice things with our premium SIP speaker, our current SIP talkback speaker, it gives you the capability to drive an auxiliary analog speaker. And with an additional speaker, it basically doubles the amount of output of the speaker and doubles your coverage area. So if you're working with a larger classroom or by chance, maybe bathrooms next to each other, hopefully you're not using talkback in a bathroom, you can go and you can offset your cost a lot by using one of these auxiliary speakers. And then finally, down here at the bottom, we've got our button settings, and this again works with that accessory button. So that way, if you want to be able to trigger a call from the speaker, you can go and set particular button settings here. So if you want to go and adjust the actual LED brightness of that particular button, set it to blink or prevent call termination with that particular button, you can utilize all of these different settings here. Then we've got a test relay button that will go and just toggle the onboard relay briefly for any testing with that particular relay. Next, we'll move over to our audio tab, and this is a specific tab that is very really only used on the speaker itself, because the speaker has so many specific audio related settings. Instead of making that device page even longer, we broke it all out into an audio tab, just so that way all of our audio related settings are available in one place. So we've got our volume settings here, and all of our speakers, our SIP speakers, ship with both a physical analog volume wheel, a scrolly wheel, scroll up for more volume, scroll down for less volume. In certain scenarios, especially schools, we recommend disabling that volume control dial, because if there's a dial and you can play with it, that means kids will play with it. So we really recommend disabling that, so that way you can set via the web interface the different volumes that would be utilized from the speaker. So things like volume in a SIP call, volume in multicast, volume when it's ringing, so use of the night ringer, and then as well as sensor volume and push to talk volume. So you can have individual control on the different audio styles that will actually come to the device, whether it's a direct SIP call or it's going to be multicast, which gives you a lot of granularity as you're going through and configuring the speaker's volume tables. If you're just using the standard volume control dial, it's all or nothing, where SIP volume will be exactly the same as multicast volume because you're just using that analog dial wheel. We really recommend in most senses actually going and just setting the volume settings through the web page, so that way you can have uniformity through all of your speakers, instead of having to have a couple people standing in a room and no, adjust that speaker a little bit, now that one's too loud, turn that one down a little bit. It's just easier to set everything up with the web interface setup, and that way you can adjust it remotely if you like. And we've got that same test function button. So if you want to go and just generate that, this is your CyberData IP speaker test message from the speaker to make sure it's producing audio, you can do that with the test audio button. And for any of our talkback speakers, you can use the test microphone button and adjust the microphone gain. So that way, if you're trying to just tune that microphone for the particular environment, you can do that. And with the test microphone button, it records about 3 seconds of audio from the microphone. And that's a good way to test, hey, has the microphone failed? Because it'll record audio from the microphone and then play it back immediately. So that'll not only test the capability of the microphone, but also test the speaker. So next we'll move on to our audio health check. And this is a very specific feature set that we've right now only got enabled on our talkback speakers. And what this does is this will go and actually play a series of tones from the speaker itself and record it back with the microphone. And then it'll do some different checks on the recorded back audio to the original audio files and do a comparison based on the different frequencies of tones that the actual speaker can output and give you an idea of the health of the speaker. So that way, if, for example, in a classroom, you've got, say, a tech that would service a whole bunch of different schools, and instead of having to send the tech out because Mrs. Jones' speaker sounds funny and maybe, they forgot to disable that volume control dial and she says her speaker isn't working, well, instead of sending the tech out there to go and check all that, you can use the audio health check button. And again, that'll just play a series of tones, and as that goes through and checks it, it'll give you a percentage on these different tones, and you can see, okay, no, my speaker is it's generating 90 to 100% on all of these different these frequencies. There's probably nothing wrong with the physical speaker or the microphone. I'm dealing with a network issue. I might be dealing with, say, a local volume issue. Hopefully they would have seen that on this page. Or, maybe it's something with the phone system that we're using. There's other problems. It's not the physical speaker itself. So that becomes super powerful there. And this is a check that you can either run just by pressing this Run Audio Health Check button, or it can be run, say, on a scheduled event, either every day at a particular time, once a week, on a particular day of the week and a particular time, or on a particular day of the month. So that way, if you want to do all of your speakers, say on, the 30th of, every month or something, you can go and configure that. And it'll all just be run on the actual speaker itself. And it gives you a nice report you can look at that'll go through and just give you a breakdown of the frequencies that were played and the percentage of check to just make sure that everything works properly. Then finally, on a right-hand side, we've got a couple different options to actually utilize the speaker. Because it's a speaker and it has a microphone, you can use it in a multitude of different manners. Our default manner that it'll ship in is kind of your speakerphone mode, very akin to what you would get on, say, your iPhone or your Android phone where you're using that in a speakerphone mode, meaning both parties, both the caller and the callee, the person at the speaker and the person at the phone, can talk simultaneously. You can kind of get that collision, but you can, talk into it like a speakerphone, like we're all used to. But in some environments, that becomes kind of challenging. If it's a loud environment, or there just seems to be a lot of echo in the room, we've got two different modes that you can utilize the actual talkback speaker in. One being Vox, or voice operated switch, and that gives the capability of when the person on the phone side is talking, it shuts off the microphone and only utilizes the speaker. So that way when they talk, everything is heard, the microphone is off, and they won't get that echo back to their handset. And then when the person on the phone side is done talking, the speaker will detect that, shut off the speaker, and enable the microphone. So that way the people around the speaker can talk, which gives it a really nice capability. We have a whole bunch of restaurants that'll use the talkback speakers mounted in their ceiling. So that way, say the maitre d' can talk to the chef and, hey, I need my order for table 1. What's going on with those steaks? What have you. You can use that kind of capability there without that kind of echo issues that you can get depending on the location and the acoustics of the room. But we've also got an acoustic echo canceller feature, an AEC. And the nice thing that we did is we have an easy integration to adjust the AEC based on the room size. And you'll adjust that using the distance to the furthest surface. So this would mean, for example, you're mounting it in a classroom, and say your classroom, just for conversation's sake, is a 10 by 20 classroom. And you've got it mounted on one wall and your other wall is 20 feet away. So you would plug in the number 20 here. And then you click the Calculate Echo Tail Length button, and it will adjust the echo tail length here. As we can see here, it made some slight adjustments to the echo frame size, tail adjustment, and echo delay to just help tune the AEC for the particular classroom or room that it's going to be in. And then finally, we've also got our push-to-talk mode, which I covered on the device page, which allows push-to-talk. So when somebody wants to talk from the speaker, they walk up and they press that accessory button and hold it, and they can talk. And when they release it, they can listen. And you can also control that on the phone side by using the pound or hash key to switch between talk and listen modes. So there's a variety of different ways to actually interact with the speaker depending on the acoustic challenges of the particular room that you're going to be putting in. And every room is going to be different. We'll just briefly check on our SIP tab here and look at the different settings here. This page looks, while presented slightly differently, a keen eye would have noticed that our SIP transport protocol and our verify server certificate information is at the top of SIP settings instead of the bottom, but all of the settings are going to be exactly the same as you saw from the SIP paging server. As I mentioned, if you've set up one CyberData device, you've set up any. And you've got the various features like the night ringer setting over here on our right-hand side, as well as the backup 1 and 2 servers if you're going to be using this with a platform like Cisco Call Manager. We won't really spend too much time here on our SIP tab. The final tab we'll take a look at on our SIP speaker is our multicast page. So on our multicast page is where you'll set up the receiving capability of the SIP speaker to work with the paging server or any other device that can generate local multicast. So first, to opt in to multicast support, you just check that box to enable multicast operation, and allows you to set the different priority options here. Priority is measured at priority 9 being top level emergency and priority level 0 being lowest priority background music. So any higher priority will supersede a lower one. So for example, if you've got background music coming through and the guys in the production floor are jamming out the top 40, if say an emergency page comes through, because that's a higher priority, priority level 9, it will play over that background music. It won't do a fancy pause of the background music. So if it, pauses in the middle of a great section of their favorite song, unfortunately, when it comes back, hopefully it wasn't really an emergency and they have to evacuate the building, but there isn't going to be a pause to that. So if it was that great, part of the crescendo of the song, they might lose that part because it's not a pause. It's basically a mute to play a higher priority system. And there's some key things to understand with the priority engine here. And priority level 9, by design, since we list that as kind of our emergency notification, will always play at max volume from the speaker, regardless of the audio settings that we covered back in our audio tab. So whether it's set to the physical volume dial and some teenager rolled that all the way down to minimum because they want to play a prank, or they've got it set to say for our default audio set through the web interface, a page at priority level 9 will always play at max volume because we, CyberData, have determined that this is your emergency page, as we kind of labeled here by default. So to prevent any of those announcements from being missed, this will always play at max volume by design. You can't change it. We designed it to work this way. So that way, in the event of an emergency, you've got the confidence that your speaker is going to play that notification no matter what. Whether some teenager, rolled down that volume dial all the way down to minimum, or your network admin set it to default volume levels because, he wasn't really bothered to go around and check all the different volume levels. An emergency level announcement, when set to an emergency level, will always play at max volume. So if you want control over the actual audio in a non-emergency scenario, say like our all page bells, you want to set that to group 8 or below, so that way you can actually have control over the different audio requirements here. So what we'll do is we'll jump over here and we'll just show how to configure one of these different page groups. So we're back on our paging server here, and we'll take the address and port combination. We'll just remember our ports so we don't have to copy and paste both, but we'll copy our address here, and this will go into the address for priority number 8 here. So we'll just do our quick copy and paste, and then we'll set our port to 2000, just as it was back on here on our page group tab. So next we'll just name this, and we'll just call this our all page group, because again, you want to name all of these so that way you understand in the future when you're taking a look at one of these, or if somebody else takes over the management of this equipment, you can go and understand this in the future. 6 months from now, you might not remember what MG8 is supposed to be. So that way, always name it while you're in here, so that way your future self will remember what you did. So as we go through, there's a couple different options that you can also set per a multicast setting. So one of the things you can do for anything besides the priority 9 emergency is you can set it to actually buffer an announcement, and we'll go and enable that here on the speaker here. So what that does is any announcement via multicast that comes through in priority level 8 will be recorded on the speaker, and then when that announcement, that multicast stream has finished, it will play the audio file back. And what this will do is this will prevent feedback actually coming through the speaker itself. So that way you don't get that feedback loop that just gets louder and louder and you can't hear anything. So if you've ever seen, say, people make announcements at a grocery store, it's commonly used in grocery stores as they call for more checkers to come to the checkout lanes and, help speed everybody up. they don't get that feedback as they're making that announcement. It's a super powerful feature. So we'll just finally hit save here, but you can also enable the beep tones per specific multicast groups, as well as the onboard relay. Say if you only want to activate the relay for specific groups and have the device take specific actions, say connected to one of those whirlybird strobes, you can have that strobe activate. So now that we've gone through that and we've basically configured everything on our SIP speaker here, we'll just go ahead and save once more just for sanity's sake, because I don't remember if I saved or not, and we'll reboot for those settings to take effect. Certain CyberData devices do require a reboot for settings to take effect. And an easy way to tell is if they've got the CGI-bin in their URL. But it's always just safer to save and reboot after you make any changes on a product. If you're not sure, it doesn't hurt to just save and reboot, so that way you know that the settings will take effect. And thankfully, our reboot timer is pretty short. It takes about a minute, and the counter that you'll get on the web page is live. So now we'll go ahead and pause and come back as soon as this timer has finished. Okay, so now that we've gone through and configured both the paging server and the speaker, let's just do a quick call example so that way you understand how to utilize these different groups on both the paging server and kind of understand how the auto attendant works. So to do that, we'll be using what we call the CyberSoftPhone. This is a 3 soft phone or soft client that we distribute via from CyberData. You can download this on our website. It's a really nice, easy tool just to be able to make calls from a PC. Depending on the phone system that you're using, you honestly might have a better soft phone to work with, but depending on your setup, you can use this if you want. You don't have to, and we won't, you're not going to hurt our feelings if you don't use this. But for the purposes of today's demo, we're going to be using this, so that way I can call it and you can actually hear what's going on. So to call our paging server, we're just going to dial 100 here, which is the extension of our paging server, and we'll click the call button.
Enter the 2-digit zone number.
And as you heard there, we get the auto attendant that prompts you to enter that 2-digit zone number. And what we'll do is we'll punch in 00 for our all page. You'll hear a beep tone in your handset or through your speakers, depending on how you have your speakers set up. And then whatever you say is going to be live. You might hear a slight echo in the background because I've got the analog output working, but it's also multicasting to our paging server that we just configured that is going to buffer the call. So now we'll go ahead and end the call. And the speaker has started playing back that audio that we just did. So you might be able to hear that going on in the background, but now that the call has ended, the paging speaker is now playing that audio that it generated, that it received and recorded that was generated from the paging server. So once that finishes, we'll go ahead and show off what the stored message group sounds like and what it's like to enter a security code. So now that that's concluded, we'll go ahead and call our paging server again.
Enter the 2-digit zone number.
We get our 2-digit zone number prompt again, and we'll enter group 10.
Enter the security code.
Now it automatically prompts us to enter that security code. So 1, 2, 3.
Currently playing. Stored message. Press #2. Cancel.
And as you heard there, it starts playing that message, and depending on how you have it set up, it will play that for a predetermined amount of times or only play it once. And at any point, you can just hit the pound key.
Enter the 2-digit zone number.
And it returns you back to that menu. So that way you can either, say, trigger a different stored message, you can make a live announcement, what have you. It gives you that capability to actually start that stored message and then stop it if you want. But one of the nice features is, we'll call it again here.
Enter the security code.
We'll enter our security code.
Currently playing. Stored message. Press #2. Cancel.
So now it's going to play that stored message, and we'll go ahead and hang up. And the paging server is going to continue to play that particular stored message. So now we can call it back.
Currently playing. Stored message. Press #2. Cancel.
And as you heard, it's still playing that stored message. So in the event of, say, that earthquake drill, you can call it, trigger that earthquake drill message, hang up, it's going to continue to play, and after the drill has concluded, you call back the paging server, you press pound.
2-digit zone number.
And it returns back to that idle state and is ready to use. And you can just make your quick announcement, 00. Our earthquake drill is finished. Great job, everybody. Please return to normal class period. And you can make that announcement, and it'll be played through your speakers. So this has been a demo of both the paging server and the SIP paging speaker, so that way you understand the different feature set and how to use these two together.
Thank you for watching this edition of CyberSchool. If you have any questions, please get in contact with our sales department. They are available by email at sales@cyberdata.net or by phone at 831-373-2601 extension 334. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content like this from CyberData.